When Zara gave away her last meal to strangers, she never imagined the billionaire at her door would reveal a secret that would shatter everything she thought she knew about love and family. The fluorescent lights of Martinez Corner Deli buzzed overhead as Zara Williams counted the crumpled bills in her palm for the third time. $4.73. Enough for a small sandwich and maybe a cup of coffee, her first real meal in 2 days. Her stomach growled audibly as she approached the counter, trying to ignore the way her worn sneakers squeaked against the linoleum floor. The elderly Puerto Rican man behind the register, Miguel, had seen her here before. He never asked questions about why a 24-year-old nursing student was counting pennies for lunch at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. "The usual, Mija?" Miguel asked kindly, his weathered hands already reaching for the bread. "Actually," Zara hesitated, studying the handwritten menu board. "Just the turkey sandwich today. Small one." As Miguel began preparing her food, the bell above the door chimed. Zara glanced over her shoulder and felt her heart sink. An elderly couple shuffled in, the woman leaning heavily on a wooden cane, the man's arm protectively around her shoulders. Their clothes were clean but threadbare, and Zara recognized the look in their eyes immediately. The same hollowed-out expression she saw in her own mirror every morning. The woman's hand shook as she opened a small change purse, coins spilling onto the counter with tiny metallic pings. "How much for just the soup?" the woman asked Miguel, her voice barely above a whisper. Miguel's expression softened. "Today's special, vegetable beef. It's $4.50 for a bowl." The couple exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. The man began counting their scattered coins, and Zara watched his face crumble as he came up short. Maybe just crackers?" the woman suggested, trying to maintain her dignity. Something twisted deep in Zara's chest. She thought about her empty refrigerator back in her studio apartment, about the overdue rent notice taped to her door, about the medical textbooks she couldn't afford for next semester. She thought about how she'd planned to make this sandwich last until tomorrow morning. Then she looked at the couple again, really looked at them. The woman's wedding ring, worn thin from decades of wear. The way the man's hand never left her back, even as his own knees seemed ready to buckle. The quiet desperation they were trying so hard to hide. "Hello, my dearest family. Before we begin, let us take a moment to lift each other in prayer. Heavenly Lord, please watch over everyone watching this story today, guide their steps, and fill their hearts with love and hope. Amen. Family, you are not just subscribers. You are my strength and my inspiration to keep creating. To those who just joined, welcome home. Kindly subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and let me know where you are watching from. I would love to meet you. Every story I share is a piece of me, my late nights, my dedication, my heart. When you leave too soon, it feels as though that sacrifice is unseen. Please stay with me until the very end. I love you all deeply. Now, let's begin our story. "Miguel," Zara called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "Cancel my order." She stepped forward, placing her money on the counter next to the couple's scattered change. "2 bowls of the vegetable beef soup, please. And some of those dinner rolls." The elderly couple turned to stare at her, confusion evident on their faces. "Oh, sweetie, no," the woman protested, her eyes filling with tears. "We couldn't." "You're not taking anything from me," Zara interrupted gently. "I'm giving it freely. Please." The man straightened his shoulders, pride warring with necessity in his expression. "Young lady, that's very kind, but my grandmother used to say that food tastes better when it's shared," Zara lied smoothly. Her grandmother had died when she was 5, and most of her memories were fragments at best. But something about these two reminded her of the few warm moments from her childhood. Consider it a blessing that works both ways. The woman began to cry openly now, not from shame, but from overwhelming gratitude. "What's your name, Angel?" "Zara. And you?" "I'm Dorothy, and this stubborn man is my husband, Frank." 47 years next month. Frank extended a weathered hand to Zora, his grip surprisingly firm. 47 years, and she still calls me stubborn like it's news. The tension broke, and they all laughed, a real, warm sound that filled the small deli like music. As Miguel ladled the soup into takeout containers, Dorothy touched Zora's arm gently. You have such a beautiful heart, child. I can see it in your eyes. Zora felt heat rise in her cheeks. We all need help sometimes. The world needs more people like you, Frank added, accepting the bag of food with both hands like it was precious cargo. I mean that. As the couple prepared to leave, Dorothy turned back one more time. Zora, I want you to remember something. Sometimes the universe has a way of rewarding kindness when we least expect it. Don't you forget that. The door chimed again as they left, and Zora stood there with empty pockets and an even emptier stomach, watching them through the window as they found a bench outside and began to eat together, Dorothy's head resting on Frank's shoulder. Miguel cleared his throat behind her. When she turned, he was holding out a wrapped sandwich and a steaming cup of coffee. Miguel, I can't. You can, and you will, he said firmly. That was beautiful, what you just did. My treat. Zora's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the food. Thank you. No, Mija. Thank you. You reminded an old man why he keeps this place open. As Zora walked home to her tiny apartment, she couldn't shake Dorothy's words. Sometimes the universe has a way of rewarding kindness when we least expect it. She had no way of knowing that less than 18 hours later, those words would prove to be more prophetic than she could ever imagine. The next morning, Zara woke to pounding on her apartment door. Through the peephole, she saw a man in an expensive suit standing in her dingy hallway. A sight so out of place it made her wonder if she was still dreaming. But when she opened the door, James Montgomery was very real, very tall, and very much staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Are you Zora Williams? His voice was deep, cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. Yes. She was suddenly aware of her oversized pajama shirt and the fact that she hadn't brushed her hair yet. My name is James Montgomery. I believe you met my grandparents yesterday. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Your grandparents? Dorothy and Frank Henderson. Though I suppose you knew them by their married name. James's eyes, the same warm brown as Dorothy's, studied her face intently. They told me about your kindness yesterday. About the soup. Zora gripped the doorframe. I don't understand. They seemed. They were counting change for soup they didn't need, James finished quietly. They do that sometimes. Test people. See how the world treats them when they appear to have nothing. I'm sorry, what? Zora's voice came out as barely a whisper. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. In it, Dorothy and Frank stood in elegant evening wear at what appeared to be a charity gala, surrounded by people in tuxedos and glittering gowns. At the bottom, she could make out words engraved on a plaque. Henderson Foundation, 30 years of giving. My grandfather built Henderson Industries from nothing, James explained. When he retired, they established a foundation to help people in situations like... He gestured around her sparse hallway. Like yours. But they got tired of people trying to take advantage of their generosity. So they started going out in disguise, looking for genuine kindness. Zora felt like she might faint. So yesterday was, what? A test? Not exactly. James's expression softened. They really were hungry. They really did need help. The difference is that they could have afforded the soup. But you couldn't afford to give up your meal, and you did it anyway. Zora stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The elegant couple in the picture bore little resemblance to the frail, desperate pair she'd helped yesterday. Yet the eyes were unmistakably the same. This doesn't make sense, she whispered, stepping back from the doorway. Why would they? Because my grandmother was once exactly where you are now, James interrupted gently. 48 years ago, She was a young black woman working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over her head. No family, no safety net. Just determination and a heart too big for her own good. He paused, studying Zara's face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. She met my grandfather when she gave her last $5 to help him pay for his mother's medicine. He was working undercover, investigating worker conditions at the factory where she cleaned offices at night. He'd disguised himself as a struggling widower to get the real story. Zara's legs felt unsteady. And now they're testing people? Not testing. Searching. James stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. They've been looking for someone specific for over 2 years now. Someone like me? Zara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his words hit her like a physical blow. Someone exactly like you. Zara Williams, born October 15th, 1999, at Mercy General Hospital. Mother, Angela Williams, 17 years old at the time of birth. Father unknown. The photograph fluttered from Zara's numb fingers to the floor. How do you? She couldn't finish the sentence. Your mother worked for my family's foundation when she was pregnant with you, James continued, his voice impossibly gentle. She was barely older than you are now, scared, alone. My grandparents tried to help her, but she disappeared one night before you were born. Left no forwarding address, no trace. Zara's world was spinning. What are you saying? I'm saying they never stopped looking for you. James bent to retrieve the fallen photograph. And I'm saying that the woman who gave her last meal to 2 strangers yesterday has been searching for her family her whole life. And her family has been searching just as hard for her. The hallway seemed to close in around them. Zara pressed her back against the doorframe, her breath coming in short gasps. This is insane. You're telling me that these random people I helped are... What? My family. Not random, James said softly. And yes, in a way. My grandmother sponsored your mother through a teen pregnancy program. When Angela disappeared, Dorothy blamed herself. She's carried that guilt for 24 years. Zara felt tears burning behind her eyes. She left me with foster families. I've been alone since I was 8. She didn't want to leave you. James's voice cracked slightly. According to the letters she left behind, she thought she was protecting you. She was being threatened by your biological father. Apparently, he was involved with some dangerous people. She thought if she disappeared, they'd leave you alone. The foster homes. The constant moving. The casewalkers who never had answers about why her mother had given her up. Suddenly, pieces of a puzzle Zara had carried her whole life began clicking into place. Where is she now? The question escaped before she could stop it. James's expression darkened. We don't know. The trail went cold years ago. But Zara... He hesitated. There's something else. Before Zara could ask what he meant, footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Dorothy and Frank appeared on the landing, and this time they looked nothing like the frail couple from yesterday. Dorothy moved with purpose, her cane nowhere to be seen. Frank's shoulders were straight, his eyes alert and sharp. James, Dorothy said, slightly out of breath. We came as soon as we could. Did you tell her? Tell me what? Zara demanded, looking between the 3 of them. Dorothy approached slowly, as if afraid Zara might bolt. Sweetie, your mother didn't just disappear. 3 weeks ago, we found her. The world stopped. She's alive. Zara's voice was barely audible. She's alive, Frank confirmed. And she's been looking for you too. But there's a complication. Zara felt like she might collapse. 24 years of wondering, of imagining, of hoping. And now they were telling her that her mother was not only alive, but had been searching for her too? What kind of complication? She managed. Dorothy and Frank exchanged another one of their meaningful looks. James stepped forward, his jaw tight. Your biological father found her first. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. He's been using her as leverage, James continued. Threatening her, keeping her isolated. He knows she's been looking for you, and he's been using that against her. We think he's been watching you too. Zora's knees finally gave out. She slid down the doorframe until she was sitting on the floor, her head spinning. "This isn't real," she whispered. "This can't be real." Dorothy immediately knelt beside her, and for the first time since this conversation began, she looked exactly like the gentle woman from the deli. "Oh, sweetheart, I know it's overwhelming, but you're not alone anymore. You have never been alone. We just couldn't find you. I need—" Zora started, then stopped. What did she need? Air? Space? Answers? Her mother? "You need time," Frank said kindly. "This is a lot to process." "No." Zora's voice was stronger now, fueled by 24 years of unanswered questions. "I need to see her. I need to see my mother." James crouched down to her eye level. "It's not that simple. He's dangerous, Zora. The man who contributed to your DNA. He's not someone you want to cross." "I don't care." Zora struggled to her feet, surprising herself with the intensity of her own voice. "I've been alone my entire life. If my mother is alive, if she's been looking for me, then nothing else matters." "Everything matters," Dorothy said urgently. "Your safety matters. Her safety matters. If he finds out we've made contact, then we don't let him find out." Zora looked between the three of them, seeing something in their faces that hadn't been there before. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "Zara," James said carefully, "what we're talking about isn't just a reunion. It's essentially a rescue mission. Are you prepared for that?" She thought about yesterday, about giving up her last meal for strangers, about all the nights she'd gone hungry, all the times she'd chosen kindness over self-preservation, about the strength it had taken just to survive this long on her own. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," she said quietly. "I just didn't know it." James pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. "If we do this, there's no going back. Once we make contact, he'll know. And everything changes." "Everything already has changed," Zora replied. "The moment you knocked on my door." Dorothy reached out and took Zora's hand, her fingers warm and steady. "Your mother, she's going to be so proud of the woman you've become." "How do you know?" Zora asked. "Because yesterday, watching you give away your meal without a second thought, I saw exactly the same heart that made her sacrifice everything to keep you safe 24 years ago." James made the call. As the phone rang in his ear, Zora realized that her life, the quiet, struggling, lonely existence she'd built for herself, was over. In its place was something terrifying and beautiful and completely unknown. But for the first time in 24 years, she wasn't facing the unknown alone. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, cautious, barely above a whisper. "Hello." James's entire demeanor changed, becoming gentle in a way that made Zora's chest tighten. "Angela? It's James Montgomery. We found her." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Zora wondered if the call had dropped. Then she heard it, a sound that cut through her like broken glass. Her mother was crying. Is she okay?" Angela's voice was thick with tears. James looked at Zora, his eyebrows raised in question. Slowly, Zora nodded. "She's right here," James said. "Would you like to?" "No." The word came out sharp, panicked. "Not on the phone. He monitors. He has ways of listening." "Is she safe? Please tell me she's safe." Zora stepped forward, her hands shaking. "Let me talk to her." James hesitated, then held out the phone. Zora took it with trembling fingers. "Mom." The word felt foreign on her tongue, like speaking a language she'd once known but had forgotten. The sob on the other end was immediate and raw. "Oh my God. Oh baby. Your voice. You sound so grown up." Tears spilled down Zora's cheeks. "I've been looking for you my whole life." "I know, sweetheart. I know. And I have been dying to find you, but I couldn't." He made sure I couldn't. Angela's voice dropped even lower. "Listen to me carefully. You can't come here. Do you understand? It's not safe." "I don't care about safe," Zara said fiercely. I've spent 24 years not knowing who I was or where I came from. I'm not walking away now. Zara. No. Whatever he's done to you, whatever he's threatened, we'll figure it out. But I am not losing you again. There was another long pause. When Angela spoke again, her voice carried a strength that hadn't been there before. You're just like I was at your age. Stubborn as hell and twice as brave. Despite everything, Zara smiled. Is that why you named me Zara? I named you Zara because it means blooming flower in Hebrew. I wanted you to grow and flourish, even if I couldn't be there to see it. Angela's voice broke again. And from what James tells me about yesterday, you did exactly that. Dorothy had been listening to every word, tears streaming down her own face. She gestured for the phone, and reluctantly, Zara handed it over. Angela, sweetheart, it's Dorothy. We need to get you out of there. Mrs. Henderson, I've tried. You know I've tried. But every time I make a move, he finds out. And he's made it clear that if I disappear again, he'll hurt her. He's been watching her, Dorothy. For years. The blood drained from Zara's face. Watching me. Dorothy covered the phone's speaker with her hand. We suspected as much. There have been incidents. People asking questions about you at your school, your work. We thought it might be connected. James stepped closer to Zara, his voice low and urgent. That's why we had to be so careful about approaching you. We couldn't be sure who else might be watching. But you approached me anyway, Zara realized. You took the risk. Yesterday changed everything, Frank said quietly. When you gave up your meal, you proved something to us. Something we needed to know. What? That you have the strength to do what needs to be done, Dorothy answered, then spoke back into the phone. Angela, we have a plan. But it's going to require all of us working together. What kind of plan? Angela asked, and Zara could hear the hope and fear warring in her mother's voice. James moved to the small window at the end of the hallway, peering down at the street below. There's a charity gala tomorrow night. The Henderson Foundation's annual fundraiser. It's public, lots of security, lots of witnesses. He'll be there, Dorothy continued into the phone. Marcus Delacroix never misses an opportunity to network with wealthy donors. His construction business depends on those connections. Zara felt the name hit her like a physical blow. Marcus Delacroix? That's my father. Biologically speaking, Frank said grimly. But he's never been a father to you. He's the reason your mother had to disappear. He's dangerous, Zara. Angela's voice came through the phone speaker. He's connected to people who don't solve problems with words. James turned back from the window. Which is exactly why the gala is perfect. Too many eyes, too much at stake for him to cause a scene. If we can get Angela there. How? Zara interrupted. You said he's been watching her. Dorothy smiled, and for the first time since this conversation began, it looked genuinely hopeful. He's been watching Angela Williams, a scared 19-year-old girl who disappeared 24 years ago. He hasn't been watching Dorothy Henderson's newest scholarship recipient. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Angela had been living under an assumed name in a small town 2 hours away, working as a night shift nurse to avoid detection. Marcus had people keeping tabs on her, but they were looking for someone trying to hide, not someone stepping into the spotlight. We create a paper trail, James explained as they moved the conversation into Zara's apartment. Angela receives a last-minute invitation to the gala as a scholarship recipient. Full makeover, security detail disguised as event staff, the works. And then what? Zara asked, though she was beginning to understand. Then you meet your mother, Dorothy said simply. In front of 300 witnesses, including several board members of the police commissioner's charity. If Marcus wants to object, he can do it publicly. Angela's voice came through the phone, stronger now. What about after? He's not going to just let this go. After, you don't have to face him alone anymore, Frank said firmly. We have resources, Angela. Legal resources, security resources. Things we didn't have 24 years ago. And Zara? Angela asked. Zara took the phone back, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. After, we're a family. Whatever that looks like, whoever tries to stop us. We figure it out together. She could hear her mother's smile through the phone. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher, Zara said, thinking of all the foster mothers who'd tried their best, all the social workers who'd cared, all the moments when she'd had to choose between bitterness and hope. Even if I didn't know her name. What do you think will happen when Marcus realizes what's going on? Do you believe this plan will work, or are they walking into danger? Share your predictions. James was already making calls, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke rapidly to what sounded like security personnel. Dorothy had pulled out her own phone and was coordinating with what appeared to be a team of people who specialized in situations exactly like this one. As Zara listened to the plans forming around her, exit strategies, backup locations, legal documentation, she realized that her simple act of kindness had set into motion something far bigger than she could have imagined. But sitting in her tiny apartment, surrounded by people who were fighting for her and her mother's happiness, she also realized something else. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the only one doing the protecting. Tomorrow night, everything would change. Again. But this time, she wouldn't be facing the unknown alone. This time, she'd have her mother by her side. The next 18 hours passed in a whirlwind that left Zara feeling like she was living someone else's life. At 6 a.m., a woman named Elena arrived at Zara's apartment with 3 rolling suitcases and the kind of confidence that could part the seas. She introduced herself as Dorothy's personal stylist, but the way James deferred to her suggestions and the subtle bulge under her left arm suggested she was much more than that. We have exactly 12 hours to transform you from a nursing student into someone who belongs at a $5,000 a plate charity gala, Elena announced, surveying Zara with the intensity of a general planning a battle. The good news is that you have excellent bone structure and the kind of natural elegance that can't be taught. The challenging news is that your mother's life may depend on how convincing we are. By noon, Zara no longer recognized herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her wore a midnight blue gown that fit like it had been designed specifically for her body. Her natural hair had been styled into an elegant updo that showcased cheekbones she didn't know she had. Diamond earrings, borrowed from Dorothy's personal collection, caught the light every time she moved. You look like royalty, Dorothy breathed, her eyes filling with tears for what felt like the 100th time in 2 days. I look like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not, Zara replied, tugging at the neckline of the gown. No, James said from the doorway, and something in his voice made her turn. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You look like who you were always meant to be. Heat crept up Zara's neck under his gaze. Over the past day and a half, she'd become increasingly aware of James, not just as Dorothy and Frank's grandson, but as a man. The way he listened when she spoke, as if her words mattered more than anything else in the world. The way he'd positioned himself between her and any potential threat without making her feel helpless. The way he looked at her like she was something precious. The car will be here in an hour, Elena announced, checking her watch. James, you should get ready. Frank, Dorothy. Final briefing in 10 minutes. As the room emptied, Zara found herself alone with her reflection and her racing thoughts. In 6 hours, she would see her mother for the first time since she was an infant. In 6 hours, she would come face to face with the man whose selfishness had stolen 24 years of her life. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Looking forward to seeing you tonight, daughter. We have much to discuss. MD. The blood drained from her face. Marcus knew. James, she called out, her voice sharper than she intended. He appeared in the doorway instantly, still adjusting his bow tie. When he saw her expression, his entire demeanor shifted. What's wrong? She held out the phone with trembling fingers. James read the message, his jaw tightening with each word. Elena, he called out, his voice carrying an edge of command that reminded Zora that despite his kindness, James Montgomery was not a man to underestimate. Elena reappeared, took one look at the phone, and began speaking rapidly into her earpiece in what sounded like code. "How did he get my number?" Zora asked. "Same way he's been keeping tabs on you for years," James replied grimly. "The question is, how does he know about tonight?" Dorothy and Frank rushed in, taking in the scene with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke to years of handling crises. "Options?" Frank asked tersely. "We abort," Elena said immediately. "Get Zora somewhere safe, regroup, try again later." "No." The word came out of Zora's mouth with such force that everyone turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not." "Zora, if he knows," Dorothy began. "If he knows, then running now means my mother stays trapped forever," Zora interrupted. "He's counting on me being scared. He's counting on us backing down." She looked around the room at these people who had become her family in less than 2 days. People who were willing to risk everything for her happiness. 24 years ago, my mother sacrificed her relationship with me to keep me safe. Yesterday, I sacrificed my meal for 2 strangers because it was the right thing to do. Today, I'm going to sacrifice my fear for the chance to get my mother back. James stepped closer, his eyes intense. "This isn't just about fear anymore, Zora. If he knows we're coming, he'll be prepared. This could be dangerous in ways we haven't planned for. Then we adapt the plan." Zora's voice was steady, surprising herself. "But we don't abandon it." Elena was still speaking into her earpiece, coordinating with her team. She turned back to the group with a grim expression. "Security sweep of the venue shows no obvious threats, but that doesn't mean much if he's had time to prepare. We can increase Zora's protection detail, but nothing," Dorothy interrupted, looking at Zora with something that might have been pride. "If she's determined to do this, then we support her. That's what family does." The weight of the word family settled over the room like a blanket. Zora felt tears prick behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. There would be time for crying later, hopefully tears of joy. "There's something else," James said quietly. "Angela called while you were getting ready. Marcus contacted her too." Zora's heart stopped. "Is she okay?" "She's scared, but she's also angry. Apparently, 24 years of being controlled by fear has given way to 24 years of suppressed rage." James almost smiled. "She told me to tell you that she's done letting him make decisions for her family." "Her family? You, Zora?" "She said she's done letting him make decisions about you." The car arrived exactly when Elena said it would. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows and what appeared to be reinforced panels. As they drove through the city toward the downtown hotel where the gala was being held, Zora watched familiar streets blur past the window and realized this might be the last time she saw the world the same way. After tonight, she would either have her mother back, or she would understand exactly what Marcus Delacroix was capable of. Either way, the girl who had counted pennies for soup yesterday was gone forever. "Nervous?" James asked softly. He was sitting beside her in the back seat, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated that suited him perfectly. "Terrified," she admitted. "But also excited? Is that wrong?" "It's not wrong. You're about to get something you've wanted your entire life. What if she doesn't like who I've become?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. James turned to look at her fully, his dark eyes serious. "Zora, in the past 2 days, I've watched you sacrifice your last meal for strangers, stand up to a dangerous man you've never met, and agree to walk into a potentially volatile situation to save someone you barely remember. If your mother doesn't see how extraordinary you are, then she's not paying attention." The intensity in his voice made her look at him more carefully. "James, yes. Why are you doing all this? I mean, I understand why Dorothy and Frank are helping. They feel responsible for what happened to my mother. But you don't owe me anything." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My grandparents raised me to believe that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. Justice, family, love. He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. You're all three of those things, Zara. The car pulled up to the hotel entrance, where photographers and guests in evening were already creating a scene of controlled chaos. Elena turned around from the front seat. Last chance to change your mind. Zara looked out at the glittering scene, then at James, then at Dorothy and Frank, who were following in the car behind them. Let's go get my mother, she said. As they stepped out into the flash of cameras and the murmur of the crowd, Zara realized that whatever happened next, she was no longer the scared, lonely girl who had eaten dinner alone in her studio apartment just 48 hours ago. She was Zara Williams, and she was walking into the fight of her life surrounded by people who loved her. It was time to bring her mother home. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel was a vision of understated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, and the soft murmur of conversation mixed with the gentle notes of a string quartet. Zara had never seen anything like it. Stay close, Elena murmured in her ear, her trained eyes scanning the crowd. Our people are positioned throughout the room, but in a crowd this size, anything can happen. Zara nodded, trying to calm her racing heart as they moved through the reception area. She recognized some faces from newspapers and local news. City councilmen, business leaders, socialites whose charity work made headlines. Everyone looked like they belonged here. Everyone except her. You're doing fine, James said softly, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. Just breathe. Easy for you to say. You grew up going to parties like this. Actually, I hated every single one of them until tonight, he replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her forget about the crowd around them. Dorothy and Frank approached, both looking elegant and at ease in their formal wear. Dorothy's eyes were bright with excitement and barely contained nerves. Any sign of her yet? Zara asked. Elena's team is bringing her through the staff entrance in 10 minutes, Frank replied. She'll be seated at our table, number 12, right by the stage. And Marcus? Dorothy's expression hardened. Table 15. Close enough to see everything, far enough away that he can't cause a scene without everyone noticing. The lights dimmed slightly, and a distinguished-looking man in his 60s approached the podium on the stage. Zara recognized him as Richard Blackwood, the Foundation's board chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 31st Annual Henderson Foundation Gala. As he began his opening remarks, Zara felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She turned to see Elena, whose expression was carefully neutral. She's here, Elena whispered. Zara's breath caught. Where? Don't turn around yet. Let me position everyone first. The next 60 seconds felt like an hour. Elena spoke quietly into her earpiece while James and his grandparents formed a subtle protective circle around Zara. The chairman's voice continued from the stage, but his words became background noise as every nerve in Zara's body focused on the moment that was about to change everything. Okay, Elena finally said. Turn around slowly. She's at our table. Zara turned, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. And there she was. Angela Williams sat at table 12, her hands folded in her lap, wearing an elegant black dress that made her look years younger than she probably was. Her hair was different from the old photo Zara had seen, shorter, with streaks of silver that caught the light. But her eyes were exactly like Zara's own. For a moment, mother and daughter simply stared at each other across the crowded ballroom, 24 years of separation and longing compressed into a single shared breath. Then Angela smiled, a radiant, tearful expression that lit up her entire face, and Zara felt something inside her chest break open. She moved without conscious thought, weaving between tables and around waiters, her elegant gown flowing behind her like water. Vaguely, she was aware of Elena and James following, but nothing mattered except reaching the woman who had given her life and then sacrificed everything to protect it. Angela stood as Zara approached, her own eyes streaming with tears. "My beautiful baby girl," she whispered as Zara fell into her arms. The embrace was everything Zara had dreamed it would be, and nothing like she had imagined. Her mother was smaller than expected, more fragile, but her arms were strong and sure as they held Zara tight. She smelled like vanilla and jasmine, and something indefinably comforting that Zara's soul recognized, even if her mind didn't. "I'm sorry," Angela sobbed against her daughter's hair. "I'm so sorry I couldn't keep you safe without leaving you alone." "You did keep me safe," Zara replied, pulling back to look at her mother's face. "Look at me, Mom. I'm okay. I'm here, and I'm okay." Angela cupped Zara's face in her hands, her fingers tracing her daughter's features like she was trying to memorize them. "You're so beautiful. So strong. I can see it in your eyes. You're stronger than I ever was. I learned from the best teacher I never knew I had," Zara said, echoing her words from the phone call. They were interrupted by the sound of slow, deliberate applause from behind them. What a touching reunion. The voice was smooth, cultured, and carried just enough volume to draw attention from nearby tables. Zara felt her mother's body go rigid in her arms. She turned to face Marcus Delacroix for the first time. He was not what she had expected. Tall and distinguished, with silver hair and an expensive tuxedo, he looked like he could have been any of the other wealthy philanthropists in attendance. But his eyes, pale blue and calculating, held a coldness that made Zara's skin crawl. "Hello, Angela," he said, his tone conversational. "You look well. Prison must have agreed with you." "Prison?" Zara stepped protectively in front of her mother. Marcus's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Has she not told you? Your mother spent 2 years in county lockup for embezzlement. Though I suppose embezzlement is a harsh word for a desperate woman trying to feed her child." "You bastard," Angela whispered, but there was no defeat in her voice, only fury. "You know exactly why I took that money." "Do enlighten us," Marcus said, settling into a chair at their table as if he'd been invited. "I'm sure our daughter would love to hear the story." Elena had materialized beside them, her hand resting casually on her purse in a way that suggested it contained more than makeup and credit cards. James and his grandparents had formed a protective semicircle around the table, but they were careful not to make a scene that might escalate the situation. "The story," Angela said, her voice growing stronger, "is that you threatened to kill my baby if I didn't disappear. And when I tried to take her somewhere safe, you had me arrested on fabricated charges, so I'd lose custody permanently." Zara felt the blood drain from her face. "Is that true?" Marcus shrugged, as if they were discussing the weather. "Your mother has always had a flair for the dramatic. The charges were quite real, I assure you. Because you planted evidence," Angela shot back. "Just like you've been watching her for years, making sure she never got too comfortable, never got too successful." "Watching her?" Zora's voice was deadly quiet. "Every job application that got mysteriously rejected. Every scholarship that fell through at the last minute. Every time you started to build something stable in your life." Angela's eyes were blazing now. "He made sure you stayed struggling, stayed vulnerable." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. All those times Zara had felt like she was being sabotaged by forces beyond her control. All those opportunities that had vanished without explanation. It hadn't been bad luck or coincidence. It had been him. "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Marcus leaned forward, his pale eyes fixed on her face. "Because, my dear daughter, you are my insurance policy. As long as you existed, struggling, alone, in need, I had leverage over your mother. And as long as I had leverage over your mother, certain secrets about my business practices remained buried." "What secrets?" James demanded, his voice hard as steel. "Oh, nothing too dramatic. A few corners cut on construction projects, a few safety regulations ignored, a few city officials who needed encouragement to approve certain permits. Marcus's smile was poisonous. Your mother witnessed several of these encouragements during the brief time we were acquainted. Dorothy stepped forward, her voice regal with authority. Mr. Delacroix, you are a guest at a charity event. I suggest you remember where you are. Of course, Mrs. Henderson. How rude of me to discuss business at such a lovely gathering. Marcus stood, straightening his bow tie. I was simply catching up with my daughter and her mother. Family reunions can be so emotional. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. Oh, and Zara? Now that you know the truth about your mother's past, I trust you'll make better choices about your future associations. Some secrets are worth keeping buried, don't you think? The threat was clear, even wrapped in polite words. But as Marcus walked away, disappearing into the crowd of elegantly dressed guests, Zara felt something unexpected rising in her chest. Not fear, not even anger. Pure, crystalline determination. Mom, she said, taking Angela's hands in hers. Look at me. Angela raised her tear-filled eyes to meet her daughter's gaze. I don't care what you did or didn't do 24 years ago. I don't care what secrets he thinks he's holding over us. And I sure as hell don't care about his threats. She squeezed her mother's hands tighter. We are not running anymore. We are not hiding anymore. And we are definitely not letting him control our lives anymore. Angela stared at her daughter with wonder, and something that might have been pride. Baby, you don't understand how dangerous he is. No, Mom. He doesn't understand how dangerous we are. Zara looked around at James, at Dorothy and Frank, at Elena, and the network of people who had appeared in her life like guardian angels. He's been playing this game alone for 24 years. But now he's up against something he's never had to face before. What's that? Angela asked. Zara smiled, and for the first time since Marcus had approached their table, it reached her eyes. A family. The rest of the gala proceeded with the surreal quality of a dream. Zara sat beside her mother, their hands clasped together under the table, as speakers took the stage to talk about the Henderson Foundation's work. She tried to focus on their words, but her mind was racing with plans and possibilities. Marcus had returned to his table, where he sat with two other men in expensive suits, occasionally glancing in their direction with that same cold smile. Elena's security team had positioned themselves strategically throughout the room, but Zara could feel the tension radiating from everyone at their table. During the silent auction portion of the evening, James leaned close to her ear. We need to talk. All of us. There's something you don't know yet. What do you mean? Not here, he said quietly. But there's a reason my grandparents have been looking for you for so long, and it's not just guilt over what happened to your mother. Before Zara could ask what he meant, the lights dimmed, and a new speaker approached the podium. She recognized him as Detective Ray Santos from the local news, a decorated police officer who worked with various charitable organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, Detective Santos began, tonight I'd like to talk to you about a different kind of foundation, the foundation of trust that holds our community together. As he spoke about integrity and justice, Elena appeared behind their table, bending down to whisper something urgent in Dorothy's ear. Dorothy's face went pale, then hard as granite. What is it? Zara whispered. We need to leave. Now, Dorothy replied, standing smoothly and gathering her purse. But as they began to rise from their chairs, Marcus's voice cut across the ballroom, amplified by the microphone at his own table. Detective Santos, if I may interrupt for just a moment? The detective paused, looking surprised but nodding politely. Marcus stood, commanding the attention of the entire room with the practiced ease of a man used to being heard. I'd like to share a story about foundations and trust that I think our guests will find illuminating. Zara felt her blood turn to ice. 25 years ago, I was a young businessman trying to make an honest living in construction. I employed a young woman named Angela Williams, who seemed trustworthy and hardworking. His voice carried perfectly across the silent ballroom. Imagine my shock when I discovered she had been embezzling funds from my company to support a drug habit. "You lying son of a—" Angela started to stand, but Elena's firm hand on her shoulder kept her seated. "Now, I could have pressed charges immediately," Marcus continued, his tone reasonable and measured. "But I believed in second chances. I tried to help her get clean, even after she became pregnant and refused to name the father of her child." Zara watched in horror as Marcus wove his lies with just enough truth to make them believable. Around the ballroom, she could see guests turning to look at their table with expressions ranging from sympathy to suspicion. Sadly, Angela's problems escalated. She began stealing not just money, but sensitive documents, contracts, safety reports, communications with city officials. When I finally had no choice but to involve law enforcement, she disappeared with her infant daughter. Detective Santos looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Delacroix, perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for—" "Oh, but it is, Detective," Marcus interrupted smoothly. "Because that infant daughter is here tonight, and I believe she has a right to know the truth about her mother's past." The ballroom had gone completely silent. Every eye in the room was now fixed on their table. Marcus turned to look directly at Zara, his pale eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "Zara Williams, would you please stand?" For a moment, Zara felt paralyzed. This was exactly what he wanted, to humiliate her and her mother in front of everyone, to destroy any credibility they might have had. Then she felt James's hand cover hers under the table, warm and steady and reassuring. She stood. "Yes, I'm Zara Williams," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. "And everything this man just said about my mother is a lie." A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "My dear, I understand this is difficult to hear, but denial won't change the facts." "The facts," Zara interrupted, "are that you have spent 24 years terrorizing my mother to keep her quiet about your illegal business practices." Marcus's face went hard. "That's a very serious accusation to make without proof." "You're absolutely right," said a new voice from the back of the ballroom. Everyone turned to see Detective Santos walking down the aisle between tables, but he wasn't alone. He was followed by 3 other officers and a woman in a dark suit who had FBI written all over her. "It would be a serious accusation to make without proof," Detective Santos continued, reaching their table. "Fortunately, we have plenty." He looked directly at Marcus, whose face had gone ashen. "Marcus Delacroix, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and witness intimidation." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests were standing, craning their necks to see what was happening. Camera phones appeared, flashing in the dim light. But Zara only had eyes for her mother, who was staring at Detective Santos in shock. "I don't understand," Angela whispered. The FBI agent stepped forward, her badge clearly visible. "Ms. Williams, my name is Agent Rebecca Torres. We've been building a case against Mr. Delacroix for the past 18 months. We've been waiting for you to come forward. But I never—" "You didn't have to," Dorothy said, standing and placing a protective hand on Angela's shoulder. "We did it for you." Zara spun to look at Dorothy, then at James, then at Frank. "What is she talking about?" James stood as well, his expression serious but gentle. "Zara, my family's foundation doesn't just give money to charity. We also fund investigations into corruption and abuse of power. When we found your mother 3 weeks ago, we also found evidence," Frank added. "Documents she had hidden before she was arrested. Proof of Marcus's illegal activities." Agent Torres nodded. "Ms. Williams was never a criminal, Ms. Williams. She was a whistleblower who was silenced before she could testify." Zara looked at her mother, who was crying again, but these were tears of relief, not fear. "The embezzlement charges?" Zora asked. Fabricated, Detective Santos confirmed. The money she stole was actually payment for keeping quiet about safety violations that could have killed people. When she refused to take the bribe and threatened to go to authorities, he had her framed. As the officers led Marcus away in handcuffs, he turned back one last time, his pale eyes filled with rage and something that might have been fear. "This isn't over," he said quietly, but his words carried across the silent room. Agent Torres stepped into his line of sight, blocking his view of Zora and Angela. "Yes, Mr. Delacroix," she said calmly. "It is." As the law enforcement officers and their prisoner disappeared through the ballroom's main doors, the guests began to murmur among themselves, the shock of what they'd witnessed slowly giving way to excited chatter. Zora sank back into a chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "I need some air," she said faintly. James immediately stood. "I'll come with you." "We all will," Dorothy declared. "Just when you think you know the whole story, everything changes. What do you think was really in those documents Angela hid? And what do you think will happen now that Marcus is finally being held accountable?" They made their way through the crowd and out onto the hotel's rooftop garden, where the city lights sparkled below them and the cool night air helped clear Zora's racing thoughts. "So all this time," she said slowly, "my mother wasn't running from justice. She was running from injustice." "Your mother is a hero," Frank said firmly. "She risked everything to try to stop a dangerous man from cutting corners that could have cost lives. And paid the price for 24 years, Angela added quietly. "Not just me, you too, baby. You grew up in foster care because I couldn't find a way to keep you safe and do the right thing at the same time." Zora turned to face her mother fully, taking both of her hands. "Mom, listen to me. You did do the right thing. You kept those documents safe, even when it cost you everything. You protected people you didn't even know, and you protected me the only way you could. But you grew up alone." "I grew up strong," Zora corrected gently. "I grew up knowing how to survive, how to help others, how to make hard choices. You think I learned that in a vacuum? You think the woman who sacrificed everything for justice didn't somehow teach her daughter about courage, even from a distance?" Angela stared at her daughter through tears. "When did you become so wise?" "About 2 days ago," Zora replied with a shaky laugh, "when I met some people who taught me what family really means." She looked around at Dorothy, Frank, and James, the people who had turned her world upside down in the best possible way. "I spent my whole life thinking I was alone," she continued. "But I wasn't alone. I was just waiting for the right moment, the right people, the right reason to discover who I really was." James stepped closer, his dark eyes intense in the moonlight. "And who are you, Zora Williams?" She considered the question seriously, thinking about everything that had happened since she'd given away her last meal to 2 strangers. "I'm the daughter of a hero," she said finally. "I'm part of a family that fights for justice. And I'm someone who's finally ready to stop just surviving and start really living." Dorothy clasped her hands together, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Welcome home, sweetheart." As they stood together on the rooftop, the chaos of the evening settling into something that felt like peace, Zora realized that Marcus had been wrong about one crucial thing. She wasn't his insurance policy. She was his downfall. And now, finally, she was free to become whoever she wanted to be. 3 weeks later, Zora stood in the kitchen of Dorothy and Frank's sprawling estate, helping her mother prepare Sunday dinner. It was a scene so normal, so perfectly domestic, that sometimes she had to pinch herself to believe it was real. "Pass me the rosemary, sweetheart," Angela said, stirring the gravy with the kind of easy confidence that suggested she'd been cooking in this kitchen her whole life instead of just 21 days. The transition had been surprisingly smooth. Angela had moved into the guest house on the Henderson property. "Just until we figure out what comes next," she'd said, though everyone knew she was exactly where she belonged. The FBI had cleared all charges against her, and several news outlets had picked up the story of the whistleblower who'd sacrificed everything for justice. Marcus Delacroix, meanwhile, was facing federal charges that would likely keep him in prison for the rest of his life. His construction empire was being dismantled piece by piece as investigators uncovered decades of corruption, bribery, and safety violations. "You're quiet today," Angela observed, glancing at her daughter with the kind of maternal intuition that seemed to have kicked in instantly despite their years apart. "Just thinking," Zara replied, but her mother's knowing look suggested she wasn't fooling anyone. The truth was, she was thinking about James. She was always thinking about James these days. Over the past 3 weeks, he had become her constant companion, helping her navigate the media attention, supporting her through the emotional roller coaster of rebuilding her relationship with her mother, and simply being there whenever she needed someone who understood the magnitude of how much her life had changed. But somewhere along the way, her gratitude had evolved into something deeper and more complicated. She was falling in love with him. The realization had hit her yesterday morning when she'd woken up in her new bedroom in the main house. Dorothy had insisted she move in, just temporarily, while she figured out her next steps. And her first thought hadn't been about her mother or Marcus, or even her own future. It had been about James's smile. "He'll be here soon," Angela said casually, as if she'd been reading her daughter's thoughts. "Who will?" "James. He called an hour ago to confirm dinner. Said he had something important to discuss with the family." Zara's heart did something acrobatic in her chest. "Did he say what?" "No, but he sounded, I don't know, excited? Nervous?" Angela set down her spoon and turned to face her daughter fully. "Zara, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you feel about him?" The question was so direct, so maternal in its gentle probing, that Zara felt tears spring to her eyes. This was the kind of conversation she'd dreamed about having her whole life. A mother asking about her daughter's love life, caring about her happiness, wanting to understand her heart. "I love him," she admitted quietly. "I know it's crazy. I've known him for less than a month, but Mom, I love him." Angela smiled, the kind of radiant expression that transformed her entire face. "It's not crazy at all, baby. Sometimes the heart knows things the mind hasn't figured out yet. But what if he doesn't feel the same way? What if he's just being kind because his grandparents care about me? What if—" "Zara Williams," Angela interrupted, taking her daughter's flour-dusted hands in her own. "Let me tell you something about love that I learned the hard way. When you find someone who sees you, really sees you, for who you are and loves that person completely, you don't waste time worrying about what if. You grab onto that love with both hands and don't let go. Even when it's scary? Especially when it's scary." Angela's expression grew serious. "I spent 24 years being afraid. Afraid of Marcus, afraid of the future, afraid of hoping for too much. And you know what all that fear got me? 24 years of missing out on watching my daughter grow into the extraordinary woman standing in front of me." Before Zara could respond, they heard the front door open and James's voice calling out a greeting. Her heart immediately began racing. "In here," Dorothy's voice responded from the dining room. "And you're just in time." James appeared in the kitchen doorway, and Zara felt her breath catch. He was wearing dark jeans and a blue sweater that made his eyes look almost black, and he was carrying a bouquet of sunflowers that seemed to glow in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "For the ladies who've been taking care of everyone else," he said, offering the flowers to Angela with a slight bow. But his eyes were on Zara. "They're beautiful," Angela said, accepting the bouquet with obvious delight. "I'll just go put these in water and check on Dorothy and Frank." She disappeared through the swinging door into the dining room, leaving James and Zara alone in the suddenly too small kitchen. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something that felt both familiar and entirely new. "You said you had something important to discuss?" Zara managed. James ran a hand through his hair. A gesture she'd learned meant he was nervous about something. I do. But maybe we could talk after dinner? Somewhere private. James, you're making me nervous. Is everything okay? He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Everything is perfect, he said quietly. That's actually what I want to talk to you about. Before she could ask what he meant, Dorothy's voice called from the dining room. Dinner's ready. The meal was a masterpiece of comfortable chaos. Dorothy and Frank regaled them with stories of their early days building the foundation. Angela shared memories of her nursing career before Marcus had destroyed her life, and James kept everyone laughing with tales of his business travels gone wrong. But underneath the easy conversation, Zora was acutely aware of every time James's fingers brushed hers as they passed dishes, every time he smiled at something she said, every time his attention focused on her like she was the only person in the room. When they finally finished dessert, Angela's apple pie, which earned a standing ovation from Frank, James cleared his throat. Before we clean up, he said, I have something I'd like to say. The table went quiet, all eyes turning to him expectantly. 3 weeks ago, my grandparents asked me to help them find someone. They told me it was about justice, about righting an old wrong, about giving a family the reunion they deserved. He looked directly at Zora, his expression serious. What they didn't tell me was that in helping them find you, I was going to find something I didn't even know I was looking for. Zora's heart stopped beating entirely. James, Dorothy started, but he held up a hand. Please let me finish. He stood up, moving to stand behind Zora's chair. Zora, 3 weeks ago you gave away your last meal to help 2 strangers. That single act of kindness changed not just your life, but mine too. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders. Watching you face down Marcus, watching you fight for your mother, watching you embrace a family you barely knew because they embraced you first, it made me realize that I'd been living my life in black and white, and you brought color to everything. Tears were streaming down Zora's cheeks now, but she didn't care. I know it's fast, James continued, his voice growing stronger. I know we've both been through a lot of changes, but I also know that some things are worth taking risks for. He moved around to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I love you, Zora Williams. I love your courage, your kindness, your strength. I love the way you make everyone around you want to be better people. I love the way you've turned my grandparents' house into a home just by being in it. Dorothy was crying openly now, and Frank was beaming like he'd just won the lottery. Angela was gripping her napkin, so tightly her knuckles were white. James, Zora whispered, I love you too. The words seemed to release something in the room, a collective exhale of joy and relief and perfect rightness. I was hoping you'd say that, James said, his smile brighter than the chandelier above them. Because I have a question to ask you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Zora's world tilted sideways. It belonged to my great-grandmother, James said softly, opening the box to reveal a vintage diamond ring that caught the light like captured starfire. Dorothy and Frank gave it to me this morning and told me it was time to give it to the woman who completed our family. James, marry me, Zora. Not because it's expected, not because it's convenient, but because I can't imagine spending another day without knowing that you're going to be beside me for all the days that come after. The ring was beautiful, but not as beautiful as the expression on James's face as he waited for her answer. Zora looked around the table at the people who had become her family, Dorothy and Frank, who had never stopped searching for her, Angela, who had sacrificed everything to protect her, and James, who loved her exactly as she was while inspiring her to become even more than she'd dreamed possible. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, with a joy that seemed to fill the entire room. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. James slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then stood and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around as everyone erupted into cheers and applause. When he finally set her down, his forehead resting against hers, He whispered the words that would stay with her forever. "Welcome to the rest of our lives, Mrs. Montgomery-to-be." As the family celebrated around them, Zara marveled at how a simple act of kindness, giving away a meal she couldn't afford to lose, had led to this moment of perfect abundance. She had found her mother, her family, and the love of her life. But more than that, she had found herself. 6 months later, Zara stood in front of a full-length mirror in the bridal suite of the same hotel where her life had changed forever. The dress was a vision of ivory silk and delicate lace, a design that Dorothy had commissioned specifically for her, inspired by a sketch that Angela had drawn years ago of the wedding dress she'd dreamed her daughter might someday wear. "You look like a queen," Angela breathed, adjusting the cathedral-length veil that had also belonged to James's great-grandmother. Her eyes were already misty, though she'd promised herself she wouldn't cry until after the ceremony. "I feel like I'm in a fairy tale," Zara admitted, smoothing her hands over the dress's fitted bodice. "A really beautiful, impossible fairy tale." Dorothy appeared behind them, elegant in deep purple silk, carrying a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. "Not impossible, sweetheart. Just long overdue." She placed the flowers in Zara's hands, then stepped back to admire the complete picture. "Your great-grandmother would be so proud to see her ring being worn by such a beautiful bride." The engagement ring sparkled on Zara's finger, now accompanied by a matching wedding band that James had designed himself. But more precious than any jewelry was the family surrounding her. The mother who'd never stopped loving her, the grandparents-in-law who'd never stopped searching for her, and soon, the husband who'd seen her heart from the very first moment they met. A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. "Come in," Dorothy called. Elena peered around the door, no longer the security specialist who'd helped orchestrate their reunion, but simply a friend who'd become part of their extended family. "Ladies, it's time. The groom is getting restless, the guests are seated, and Detective Santos just arrived with some news that I think you'll want to hear." "News?" Angela asked, immediately alert to potential threats, a habit that 6 months of safety still hadn't completely erased. "Good news," Elena assured her quickly. "Marcus Delacroix was sentenced this morning. 25 to life, no possibility of parole." The room fell silent as the weight of those words settled over them. 24 years of fear and running, and looking over shoulders, finally over. "It's really finished," Angela whispered. "It's really finished," Dorothy confirmed, taking her soon-to-be daughter-in-law's hands. "Now we can focus on beginnings." As they prepared to leave the bridal suite, Zara took one last look at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was radiant with happiness, surrounded by love, about to marry the man of her dreams. But she was also something else. She was complete. Not because James completed her, but because she had finally found all the pieces of herself that had been scattered across 24 years of searching. The ceremony was held in the hotel's rooftop garden, transformed into a wonderland of twinkling lights and white flowers. As Zara walked down the aisle on Frank's arm, he'd asked for the honor, and she'd been too moved to speak for several minutes after accepting. She saw faces both familiar and new. There were James's business associates and college friends. There were people from the Henderson Foundation, including several scholarship recipients whose lives had been changed by Dorothy and Frank's generosity. There were Zara's nursing school classmates and professors, the people who'd supported her through her studies, even when she'd been counting pennies for meals. And there, in the front row, was Miguel from the corner deli, beaming with pride as if he were watching his own daughter get married. But most importantly, there was James. He stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his eyes fixed on her with an expression of such wonder and love that it took her breath away. As she approached, she could see that his hands were shaking slightly, not with nerves, but with the same overwhelming emotion that was making her own heart race. When Frank placed her hand in James's, the older man whispered, "Take care of each other." "Always," James replied, his voice thick with emotion. The officiant, a friend of the Henderson family who'd known James since childhood, smiled at the assembled guests. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness something beautiful and rare. The union of two souls who found each other exactly when they were meant to. As the ceremony progressed, Zora found herself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. If she hadn't given away her last meal to Dorothy and Frank, if they hadn't been testing the kindness of strangers, if Marcus hadn't finally overplayed his hand. But those were just the mechanics of fate. The real magic was simpler and more profound. Two people who recognized something essential in each other and chose to build a life around that recognition. When it came time for the vows, James went first. "Zara," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "6 months ago, you taught me that the most powerful force in the universe isn't wealth or influence or even justice. It's kindness. The kind of selfless generosity that gives away the last meal to feed strangers, that faces down dangerous men to protect the people you love, that opens your heart to a family you barely know because they need you as much as you need them." He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. "You changed my life not because you needed rescuing, but because you showed me what it looks like to be truly brave. Today I promise to spend the rest of our lives trying to be worthy of that example. I promise to love you not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. I promise to support your dreams, celebrate your victories, and hold you through your struggles. And I promise that no matter what challenges we face, we'll face them together, as partners, as best friends, and as two people who chose each other every single day." By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience, including Zora's own. When it was her turn to speak, she looked out at the faces surrounding them. Her mother, her new grandparents, Elena, Miguel, Detective Santos, Agent Torres, and so many others who had become part of their story. "James," she began, "when I was growing up, I used to wonder what it would feel like to have a family. Not just people who were related to you by accident of birth, but people who chose to love you, support you, and stand by you no matter what." She gestured to the assembled guests. "Now I know. Family isn't just the people who share your DNA. It's the people who see your heart and decide it's worth protecting. It's the grandparents who never stop searching for you, the mother who sacrifices everything to keep you safe, and the man who loves you exactly as you are while inspiring you to become even more." She turned back to James, her voice growing stronger. "You didn't just ask me to marry you. You asked me to join a legacy of kindness, generosity, and love that stretches back generations and will continue long after we're gone. Today I promise to be worthy of that legacy. I promise to love you with the same fierce devotion you've shown me. I promise to support your dreams as enthusiastically as you've supported mine. And I promise that together we'll build something beautiful, not just for ourselves, but for everyone whose life we have the privilege to touch." The ring exchange was a blur of tears and trembling fingers and whispered endearments. The kiss that sealed their marriage was met with cheers and applause that seemed to echo across the entire city. But as James pulled back to look at her, his wife now, he whispered something meant only for her. "Thank you for giving away that soup." Zora laughed through her tears. "Thank you for knocking on my door." The reception was everything a celebration should be. Joyful, chaotic, filled with laughter and dancing, and speeches that made everyone cry happy tears. Dorothy and Frank performed a waltz that had the entire room sighing with romantic envy. Angela gave a toast about second chances and the power of never giving up hope. Elena surprised everyone by revealing that she could sing, performing a jazz standard that left the audience speechless. But the most memorable moment came when Miguel approached the microphone during the open mic portion of the evening. "I don't usually speak at fancy parties," he began, his accent thick with emotion. "But I wanted to tell you all about the day I met this beautiful bride." He looked directly at Zora, his weathered face creased with affection. "She came into my deli with $4.73, hungry and counting every penny. But when she saw two old people who needed help more than she did, she gave away her last meal without thinking twice. He paused, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. That day, she taught an old man that angels walk among us, even when they're wearing worn-out shoes and counting pennies for lunch. The room erupted in applause, but Miguel held up a hand. James, you better take good care of this angel, or you'll have to answer to me and the entire neighborhood. Yes, sir, James called back, pulling Zora closer. I plan to spend every day proving I deserve her. As the evening wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, Zora found herself standing on the same rooftop where Marcus Delacroix had been arrested 6 months earlier. But this time, instead of chaos and confrontation, there was only peace and the promise of tomorrow. James appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. Mrs. Montgomery, he murmured against her ear. How does it sound? Perfect, she replied, leaning back against his chest. Everything about this is perfect. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below them, both lost in thoughts of how dramatically their lives had changed in such a short time. James, Zora said finally, what do you think would have happened if I hadn't given Dorothy and Frank that soup? He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I think, he said finally, that somehow, someway, we would have found each other anyway. Maybe not that day, maybe not that way, but eventually. Some things are just meant to be. Zora turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become her anchor, her adventure, and her home all at once. I love you, husband. I love you too, wife. As they kissed under the stars, surrounded by the afterglow of the most perfect day of their lives, Zora sent up a silent thank you to whatever force in the universe had guided her to that deli on that particular Tuesday. With exactly $4.73 and a heart big enough to change everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new opportunities to choose kindness over self-preservation. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. In the arms of love, surrounded by family, with a future stretching ahead of them like an endless possibility. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Martinez Corner Deli as Zora pushed open the familiar door, the bell chiming the same welcoming sound it had 18 months ago. But this time, she wasn't counting pennies or wondering where her next meal would come from. This time, she was carrying hope. Mija. Miguel's face lit up as he saw her, his smile even brighter when he noticed what she held in her arms. Is this the little prince I've been hearing about? Zora carefully adjusted the sleeping bundle in her arms. Her 3-month-old son, David Frank Montgomery, named for the grandfather he'd never meet, and the one who'd helped save his mother's life. He is, she said softly, her heart swelling with the same wonder she felt every time she looked at her son's perfect face. David, meet Miguel. Miguel, meet David. As if responding to his name, the baby opened his eyes, dark brown like his father's, but with flecks of gold that caught the light exactly like his mother's. Miguel came around the counter, wiping his hands on his apron before gently touching the baby's tiny fist. He's beautiful, Mija. Just like his mama. He's going to know this place, Zora said, looking around the deli that had become sacred ground in her personal mythology. He's going to know the story of the day his mama learned that kindness can change everything. The bell chimed again, and James entered carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing the slightly shell-shocked expression of a new father who'd been sent on his first solo errand while his wife visited with old friends. Did I get the right order? He asked, holding up the cups. Because I swear David started crying the minute you left, and I panicked and may have promised him a pony if he'd stop. Miguel laughed, a rich sound that filled the small space. First-time popper? Is it that obvious? Only because I remember being exactly the same way with my first, Miguel assured him. You'll figure it out. The little prince will teach you everything you need to know. As James moved to Zora's side, naturally taking half the weight of their son, while keeping one arm around his wife, Miguel watched them with the satisfaction of a man who'd witnessed the beginning of their love story. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about that day a lot lately. When you gave away your last meal to those strangers." "What about it?" Zora asked, though she'd been thinking about it too. In the past year, as her life had transformed beyond all recognition, that moment in the deli had taken on an almost mythical significance. "I used to think it was about kindness," Miguel continued. "About being a good person, even when it's hard. But now I think it was about something bigger." James shifted David to his shoulder, where the baby settled with a contented sigh. "What do you think it was about?" he asked. Miguel smiled, looking between the young couple and their sleeping son. "Faith. Not religious faith necessarily, but faith in the idea that doing the right thing matters, even when you can't see how. Faith that the universe has a way of rewarding goodness, even when it takes its own sweet time getting there." Zora felt tears prick behind her eyes. Happy tears, the kind that seem to come easily these days. "Miguel," she said quietly, "would you do us an honor?" "Anything, Mija. Would you be David's honorary grandfather? I mean, he has Frank, and he'll grow up knowing all about my father, the grandfather he'll never meet. But I'd like him to have someone who was there at the beginning. Someone who saw his parents' love story start." Miguel's eyes filled with tears, and he had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. "It would be the greatest honor of my life." They stayed for another hour, sharing stories and watching David charm everyone who came through the deli. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood that the soup angel, as some of the regulars had taken to calling Zora, was visiting with her new baby, and soon there was a small crowd of well-wishers gathered around their table. Mrs. Chun from the laundromat brought homemade cookies. The teenage boy who worked at the auto shop next door offered to teach David about cars when he got older. The postal worker who delivered mail to this corner for 20 years declared himself an unofficial uncle. As they finally prepared to leave, Miguel pressed a paper bag into Zora's hands. "What's this?" "Turkey sandwich and vegetable soup," he said with a grin. "On the house. Some traditions are worth keeping." James laughed, remembering the story Zora had told him about Miguel's generosity on that long-ago day. "Thank you," Zora said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss the older man's cheek. "For everything. For the food, for the kindness, for believing that good things happen to good people. Thank you, Mija, for proving it." As they walked home through the familiar neighborhood, now gentrifying rapidly as word spread about the area's charm, Zora marveled at how much had changed and how much had stayed exactly the same. The Henderson Foundation had expanded its programs, now specifically targeting young people who'd aged out of the foster system. Angela had returned to nursing, working with a non-profit that provided medical care to vulnerable populations. Dorothy and Frank had become the kind of grandparents who spoiled their great-grandson shamelessly and loved every minute of it. Marcus Delacroix was serving his sentence in federal prison, his empire dismantled and his victims finally vindicated. The last Zora had heard, he'd been placed in protective custody after several inmates had recognized him from news coverage of his trial. "What are you thinking about?" James asked as they paused at the corner where they'd turned toward home. The beautiful Victorian house they'd bought 3 blocks from Dorothy and Frank, close enough for family dinners, but far enough for privacy. "Everything," Zora replied honestly. "How we got here, where we're going, what we want David's life to look like." James shifted their son to his other arm, the movement so natural and protective that it made Zora fall in love with him all over again. "What do you want his life to look like?" She considered the question as they resumed walking, passing the playground where she'd decided their children would learn to swing and climb, the library where they'd discover the magic of stories, the community center where they'd volunteer as a family. "I want him to know he's loved unconditionally," she said finally. "I want him to understand that he comes from a family that chooses kindness over convenience, justice over comfort. I want him to know the story of how his parents met, but more importantly, I want him to understand that love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about choosing to be the right person every single day. They'd reached their front gate, where roses that Angela had planted were beginning to bloom in the late spring sunshine. The house beyond was warm and welcoming, with a nursery that Dorothy had decorated and a kitchen where family gathered every Sunday for dinner. "And I want him to know," Zara continued, her voice growing stronger, "that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. That giving away your last meal to strangers isn't foolish. It's the beginning of every miracle that follows." James stopped walking, turning to face his wife with an expression of such tenderness that it took her breath away. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said softly, "have I mentioned lately that I'm completely, hopelessly, eternally in love with you?" "Only every day," she replied, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him while their son slept peacefully between them. "But I never get tired of hearing it." As they walked up the path to their front door, Zara caught a glimpse of movement in the upstairs window. Angela, who lived in the converted apartment above their garage, waving down at them with the radiant smile that had become her trademark since finding her way back to happiness. Inside, she knew, Dorothy would be waiting with fresh flowers for the dining room table and questions about David's first neighborhood adventure. Frank would be reading in his favorite chair, ready to take the baby, so the young parents could have a few minutes to themselves. Elena would probably call later to check in, still protective of the family she'd helped bring together. This was what family looked like, Zara realized. Not perfect, not without challenges, but bound together by choice and love, and the unshakable conviction that they were better together than apart. As James unlocked the front door and ushered his wife and son into the warmth of home, Zara offered up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force in the universe had guided her to that deli on that Tuesday afternoon with exactly $4.73. She'd been hungry then, counting pennies and wondering if she had enough for a small sandwich. Now she had everything, and it had all started with a simple choice: to see someone else's need as more important than her own comfort. David stirred in his father's arms, opening his eyes to look around at the family gathering to welcome him home. Someday, when he was old enough to understand, they would tell him the story of the soup that changed everything. But for now, it was enough that he was surrounded by love, protected by people who would choose kindness over convenience for the rest of their lives, and part of a legacy that began with his mother's generous heart and would continue through generations yet to come. The circle was complete. The family was whole. And in a small deli across town, Miguel was already preparing for tomorrow's customers, humming softly to himself and keeping an eye out for anyone who might need a free meal and a reminder that miracles still happen every single day.